T minus 2 minutes. T minus 1 minute. T minus 50 seconds. T minus 40 seconds. T minus 30 seconds. T minus 20 seconds. Ten, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Hello everyone. My name is Smangaliso Mkuma. I'm a PhD candidate at WITS, and I also work with the Writing Center, which is how I was able to get this amazing opportunity to participate as a moderator in this Time of the Writer session. That will be speaking about the writing process mostly, but also touching on themes of freedom in writing, imagination in writing, and accountability in writing, whatever that looks like, to my two panelists here on the side. So to kick things off, I'll allow them to introduce themselves and tell the audience a little bit about themselves, and then we can begin.
Sure. Hello everyone, my name is Behiya Khan and I'm from Johannesburg, South Africa. I have an undergraduate degree in game design and a postgrad in creative writing, which is also how I met Josh. I used to work at the WITS Writing Center, which is an amazing space and opportunity, and currently I unofficially work in the video games industry. And yeah, don't study art, kids. That's a joke for legal reasons.
And hi, I'm Josh. I technically have a background in computer science. I did my undergrad in that along with English. As Bahia alluded to, I also did some postgraduate studies in creative writing where I met some amazing people and produced some writing. And I generally write short stories, but at the moment I'm more academically engaged with writing. So that's the perspective that I'm sort of coming from in this conversation as well. Yeah, and thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Yes, so thank you. Thanks for the opportunity from the Time of the Writer. This is fantastic. We've always, in passing, because we all encountered each other at the Writing Center, we've always had these conversations about writing, thinking about writing, academic writing, personal writing, what it means to us, and a whole lot of other conversations. So to begin, I think one of the things that has always interested me, and I think has come across now from Bahia's introduction, are the ways in which we relate different styles of writing and our backgrounds and our identities, and how that comes across in our writing process. So for Bahia, who has studied creative writing and game design, I think one of the questions I might ask is, have you found a relationship between what came out of your studies in game design and what came out of your studies in creative writing, and do you think there's any relationship there, or did you find one useful to the other, or how do you think about the two?
I mean, I think obviously the way that you write for different mediums is different. In my case, I don't think I'm a very flexible writer. So the way that I write is often kind of like a run on words, sort of prosaic writing, which doesn't necessarily always work in like a video games capacity. If you have played any games, the writing is very different as opposed to like reading a book or something like that. But I've carved out like a space for myself to be able to make the kind of games and write the way that I want to, which I suppose is why I don't have a job.
In the traditional
In the
sense.
traditional, what is a job anyway, you know?
Interesting.
Yeah, but I mean, I think that like each medium is interesting because it offers like different unique avenues for writing, if that's like what you want to do. But for me, I kind of feel like I do like mixed media work. So a lot of the time, even in like the video games that I make, I use film. I get a lot of inspiration from like theater as well. So I think, not to sound like a music journalist at like Pitchfork or something, but it feels like genre is dead in a way, or even like mediums, they bleed into each other. So I do think that like rules and that it maybe in like an academic setting they teach you, to do things like this. But ultimately, I think as you write, you find out what works for you. I don't know if that answers your question really, but yeah, it all just feels like a means of exercising something, and not in like exercising, I mean like demonic.
No, I mean it certainly does answer my question, because it also draws out these differences between academic writing, personal writing, and it introduces that dynamism that one needs to have when encountering writing, and sometimes it's not always there, but
Yeah, it's
it
such like a
always,
living thing,
right? So it always lives in the back of our minds that
Exactly.
we are engaged in these different contexts, and I think this actually brings you in, Josh, quite lovely with your writing of short stories. Just can you give us a sort of background of that? What has writing short stories done for you? Where does it come from? And what's your process there? How do you think about writing short stories?
Thanks, Mike. That's a really good question. And just before I answer, I also want to add to something that you said here, which is just that as a kid, I always wanted to make games and write for games as well, and that's sort of how I came through computer science as well, sort of with that intention a bit sneakily. But in the same vein, the idea of writing short stories began as a practice as a kid for me to entertain myself. Just not necessarily always putting them to paper, but when I was wandering around school or in some had some time on my hands and I needed to look at something that wasn't a TV screen, I guess. I would sort of look inward, and they weren't amazing stories. Most of them were sort of just knockoff adventures of superhero shows that I had been watching at the time and still continue to watch. But that was sort of where the not the motivation, but that aspect of my writing began. The seeds were sown, and now these days, being a little bit more sophisticated than a 7-year-old, I often use short stories as a way to explore and examining something in more detail or following a sort of train of thought to its conclusion. And it works well for me because then you don't have to sit on an idea for, say, an entire year or two. And it almost becomes a practice for yourself rather than necessarily for an audience, where you're writing these ideas almost for fun. And some of them end up being publishable, some of them, but that's sort of what it kind of means to me. It is a practice more than it is necessarily a profession or something like that. Because I've also looked at writing something that's more novel length, and it's tough. It's tough to carry an idea through. I've sort of come to the conclusion that you need at least a few ideas in order to make them a book length. And if you don't have all of those, if you just have one good idea, you don't have to make it a book. You can make it something shorter, short story to novelette. Yeah. I hope that answers what you're asking.
No, that's definitely interesting to me, especially because most of my writing has been academic writing. I've never entertained the idea that I can exercise writing short stories or recreationally. So to think that actually we have a similar process, because I will write 2-3 pages on this notepad about an idea, find out later on it's no good. But I think what comes out is something that can actually be useful in thinking about one of the themes that we had identified in the writing process, which is imagination. And if you look at the 3 themes, they actually all work together: freedom, imagination, and accountability. But I sort of want us to hone in on the back of what you just said, right? On the imagination process, because if you think about your writing short stories as a practice to exercise from the here, to exercise something when you're writing, would you say that you can think of writing as an imagination process itself, or as an expression of the boundaries of imagination, where you're putting something down on paper, you don't know where it goes, you don't know sometimes what the end is, but this is something that means something to you, and this is something you want to deal with on paper, whether it's a personal thing, academic thing, but you put it on paper and then you begin to explore it, and then it grows from an idea about Josh walking in the park into what does it mean to walk in the park, into what are parks really made for, things like that. So I sort of want to get that. Would you say that the writing process or your personal writing has been a way of exploring your own imagination?
Yeah, sure. I mean, definitely. Like when I think about as like a video game designer versus writing just a creative story or for myself or even a poem, it feels like something that's kind of in both of those things are solving something, right? And I feel like with making video games, that oh my god, hold on, sorry,
Don't worry.
my wig.
Don't worry, it's okay.
Josh, do you want to maybe?
Sure, I can hop in.
Let's have you, Josh, come in.
Yeah, that's okay. So, in response to what you were saying about the stretching the imagination, I have a little bit of an anecdote from when I was sort of in high school, and one of my English teachers had sort of taken me under her wing and tried to foster the sort of creative spirit in me. I spoke to her about how I mostly am interested in writing fantasy and sci-fi and more sensational stories, genre fiction, basically like that. And she sort of challenged that and said, well, you shouldn't limit yourself to that. In fact, you can you can write about anything, and you should write about anything, because that's how you become better as a writer. Now, we can delve into that philosophy if we want to, but just by example, what happened was I was standing by her classroom, and someone walked past eating an apple. And she said, you need to write a story about someone eating an apple and a pair of shoes. And I thought this was just impossible. I hate writing realism. I need to write something that has a hook to it. At least that was my attitude at the time. Strangely, I'm now more interested in realism, I find, a lot of the time, or at least like some weird version of realism. But it's the idea there is that there are ways to turn anything into a creative output. Whether people should is another question. I think people should do that, not for the purposes of getting published or becoming a writer, so to speak, but just for sort of the nourishment of their own ability to think, their ability to communicate. So maybe that's another aspect of it that makes writing special to me, is that it's almost like its own hobby, like going to like the gym or playing a sport or something like that, which you don't really, not everyone's trying to get into like the Olympics or compete in a high. Not everyone's trying to compete at the highest possible level. They're just doing it because they enjoy it. But as for stretching the imagination, it really is a boundless space, writing. There aren't any restraints on what you're allowed to say, what you can say if you're just writing for yourself. So if you want to take a story of someone eating an apple and suddenly they bite into an apple and it has a bruise in it, and they start thinking, well, how many places has this apple been? And then you like trace like a map of the city through this one bruised apple. That isn't what I wrote about, but there's room to come up with stuff, and
it's a mature part of you now.
Yeah, that's what I'm interested in at the moment. I think it is also just cycles. I'm not saying that fantasy and sci-fi are like less mature. I just think you have these periods where you enjoy something, and then sometimes you have to take a break from it, and then you just build on your appreciation rather than replacing it. But yeah, back to you.
I guess sometimes you're 7 years old and sometimes you're 24.
Yeah.
That's the cycle of life.
And
it's only those two.
And sometimes you need both to,
I think you definitely need both to function. So before that mortifying thing happened to me, let's just gloss over that quickly. As I was saying, I feel like in making video games and in writing, there's like something that you're solving, right? And like for me, when I make video games, I often feel like there's a lot of skills that I lack, and I can't make the game that I want to make because I don't have those skills, or I don't even know anybody else I could collaborate with who does have those skills, right? And that's very frustrating for me. And with writing, when it feels like there's a problem that I need to solve, it's more like, I don't know, it feels a little bit more like a problem I created. And I know I can solve it. I just need to, I don't know, at risk of sounding like somebody at a spiritual retreat, look within and like find out how, I know I can do it. I just need to kind of like unearth those tools. So for me, like when I think of imagination in making games versus creative writing, it feels like almost different aspects of my imagination are needed for the like in different mediums. And like even in terms of boundless inspiration, which kind of also ties into the theme of freedom, I feel like for me personally, the inspiration or imagination isn't the problem. There's so much happening all the time, and we have access to so many things, especially as people who are in like the digital age or whatever. We constantly being fed stuff. My issue comes with like a shortage of motivation, and I think that like tying into freedom, and even what you were saying of like when you write for yourself, you have the freedom to do, whatever essentially. But I feel like for people who are writing as a means of protest, not even necessarily because you want to get published or because you want to be, solidified as a writer and have like external validation. Like for some people, writing is all they can do, which is massive. It's, not to diminish it at all. But like increasingly the world, especially the Western world, is becoming more and more fascist. And I feel like you can't express yourself without fear of persecution, especially if you're writing on things like, what's happening to people in Palestine or trans people in America, or even like race politics. It's very difficult, I think, to be able to have a boundless imagination and have a conversation about it without fear of persecution.
That's actually fascinating. So as you are talking, the two of you, I was writing here a question about constraints. I actually wanted to identify, especially when Josh mentions publishing, and you mentioned the skills that you need. I wanted to identify what constraints there are for imagination in writing, and one way to overcome these constraints that there may be. Josh has alluded to about writing for yourself, and even then, I suppose there might be constraints. So,
Yeah, you could be your own barrier, you know.
all right. I wanted to start with Josh actually about publishing. Have you published?
Um, sort of. Yes. Look, I don't know if you mean like traditionally, or if you mean in the digital age that we live in now. My work is out there to find.
Yes. Okay.
People can go find it if they so wish.
A six-figure deal with Penguin Random House?
Not so much.
Oh, okay.
Not quite there. I don't think they are very keen on short stories anyway, which is mostly what my portfolio is made up of. Yes, so in a traditional sense, book-wise, no, not published from my perspective. In other ways, like zines, online platforms, maybe a collection, yes, so my work sometimes appears and stuff like that.
Because that's actually so I'm asking this question about publishing is because I think a lot of people have a struggle with publishing as an end goal to writing. And as much as, yes, we do need to write for ourselves, I also think it is important as people who write a lot to think about how we move from where we are into the publishing space. So now you've obviously highlighted that there's what you call traditional publishing, and there's what we should call the other one. What should we call the other one?
What would you call the other one? Because I'll say that I've been enjoying the app Substack recently.
Okay.
To me, it's just a bomb for what Twitter has become. So I can put Twitter aside forever. Substack, if you're not familiar or if you haven't encountered it, it's sort of like long form Twitter, but you're able to have content that is like behind a paywall, but also content that isn't. So people can subscribe to your page and read what you're writing. It can be short, little witticisms, or it can be like a full piece. It can be a story. It can be an essay.
Like
fan
essay.
fiction there.
Yeah.
I'm sure if you look, you could find fan fiction there, but it's a bit more sociable, which is also a good aspect to it. So something like that, I think, is kind of the direction that also consumers and readers are not so much taking, but it's growing as a way that sort of direct to audience deal that authors and writers are having, where it's sort of just, hey, you don't have to go to a publisher. You can just, if you want to support me, you can, and then you have access to all my writing, which I don't think is necessarily replacing traditional publishing, but I do think that it is a different landscape, and it's very open. If we call it open publishing, maybe that is I'm sure there's a technical term for it, but I'm not in publishing studies. But in that realm, that is sort of a lot more accessible, and I think in some ways it doesn't necessarily support a profession or a way of living, but it does, to me, instill a lot of the spirit of what writing is, where you're sharing stories with other people, and you're able to have almost a dialogue that is now easier to achieve. And I think it does also add more layers of accountability, because with traditional publishing, you have your editors, you have your publishers who are filtering the stories and maybe the thoughts that you're able to share. But that's a very thin filter, and then it's out in the world, and you'll see that audiences will have a response, and there's a bit more distance between the writer there and the audience. They can sort of step back and just deal with the publisher, and the publisher was like, we'll still publish your books. But if you've somehow betrayed your audience, which I think isn't so much by writing something that is low quality, but something that is maybe offensive in some way, I think that's more of a betrayal, where you're betraying the values of your audience rather than just their tastes. Then there's much more of an effect that can be felt, or at least a space for that effect to be felt, either the writer being able to respond, or the audience shutting them down and saying, actually, this is not a voice that we want to hear. We're going to start promoting other voices instead. Does that sort of speak to the point that you were wanting to bring up?
No, definitely, because I was then going to ask Bahia if you feel, because you mentioned that with everything that's going on, especially global affairs, right, there are very sensitive questions that maybe may lead one to imagine that imagination is not boundless. There are certain, I suppose, constraints or accountability protocols that need to be rendered in place. Would you say that what we have agreed is open publishing? Would you say that this is a means of enhancing credibility, no, accountability, and removing constraints for imagination, or would you say it's further constraints and removes the accountability?
From the writer.
Yes, from the writer. Yes.
I mean, I think like constraints aren't inherently a bad thing. Sometimes you do need them. Like I need some kind of like parameters of, to kind of help me. Boundless problems for me, right? Boundless equal problem. I need to be like reined in a bit because where does it end? But like I think that if you are being censored by like a fascist regime, of course that's a problem. It shouldn't be human rights. That's the thing that's being like infringed upon. So I think open publishing is, I mean, like with most things, there's a lot of like good and bad things to it. I think sometimes when, like Substack especially, I read 2 girl Substacks. That's it. Like I love reading about, just the experiences of. It's literally like almost like a diary format, which I really enjoy, like reading about their lives. One is a published author, but she just writes about like her writing process as a normal girl in her 20s, But I feel like with open publishing or Substack, audiences can sometimes feel very close to you, which can result in a parasocial relationship. There aren't all of the kind of measures in place that maybe traditional publishing offers, because you're putting yourself out there, which comes with certain, unfortunately it shouldn't, but like boundaries being collapsed. So I think like that's obviously the bad thing. Like Josh was saying of accountability, like it is nice to be able to see people who actually engage with your work and appreciate it, or maybe don't, give you their opinions on your work, because you might have, I don't know, you might not have like the cultural sensitivity in your writings to say something, and then somebody who is from that culture can say, listen, I don't think this is right, and I think that's really good, because it's a much quicker way of learning something, getting it directly like from the source. And like also, if you are an author with like a publishing house, you don't have to have social media necessarily, like your publishing house can handle all of that stuff for you. And in that way, you kind of don't engage as much with the people who read your work as opposed to Substack. So I think that like, I'm not saying you take less accountability, but you can kind of remove yourself, from, sorry, I thought I spat on you. Yes. What was I saying?
Removing yourself.
Yeah, exactly. So, and I mean, I don't know about Substack's kind of regulations around what you are allowed to write about. But yeah, I think my thing about open publishing versus like traditional or conventional publishing is kind of a lot to do with distance and your relationship to your audience.
So it seems I'm the only one who doesn't know what Substack is. And yeah, maybe I should have done game design as well.
No, you should. It's a good thing that you didn't.
But would you say Substack would be useful for someone who's primarily writing in the academic space?
I think it can be. I think you can find an audience. I suppose one of the other benefits of open publishing, now that we're committed to that title,
Yes, definitely.
is that a lot of writing, I feel, assumes that there's an audience for something. So let's say in traditional publishing, that certain publishers will have a specific genre and specific format and specific norms that they're going to try to stick to. I don't mean to make it sound as so dogmatic. There is obviously wiggle room within that. But if you look at some publishers' submission guidelines, it's sort of like, oh, you really don't publish this genre. Oh, you really aren't looking for writers with this background. Okay. And that can sort of create the feeling that your writing is not for anyone, that it's not really going to resonate with anyone, because at least I've had this experience sometimes. Sometimes weirdly my computer science background seeps into my writing. I don't even realize it until it's happening. And I just think, no one's interested in reading this weird logical proof for something that I've somehow forced into this discussion. But you don't know, and if you put it out there, people might, and it gives a much better opportunity for finding an audience, or at least like giving something to maybe a niche audience that wasn't getting anything like that before. As for what Substack like kind of is, long form Twitter kind of is like the closest
I thought
analogy.
it was like Medium, where everyone could
Yeah,
just like
Medium's
write
also
something.
Medium's also a good
you know?
analogy. Yeah. I also think of it as sort of Patreon, but like specifically writing. Even though I think you can upload videos and things. We shouldn't be experts on Substack, is the lesson.
Substack should pay us for speaking about them so much.
Boundless patrons.
Actually, that might just be something. So, I mean, one of the reasons I'm curious about this open publishing versus traditional publishing and how it facilitates accountability, how it constrains or does not constrain imagination, right? Is this question of identity when it comes to writing. So as we are speaking, we're obviously drawing from personal experiences, and Josh with the apple and the shoe story. Bahia with game design, right? Coming from high school already, you said it was where you were interested in.
I never said that, no.
I think I might have said that.
Yes.
Oh, only,
Yes.
Okay. My apologies for that.
I was definitely not interested in video games in high school.
Then you might have to tell us what you were interested in. But for me personally, academic writing has helped facilitate my own identity, right? So in a sense, with spaces like publishing spaces, right? It is one form of building a community, would you say? Substack and Patreon, would you say it's one form of building a community for the writer, especially what you were mentioning about distance, you can choose how closely you engage or not.
Can I speak back to that?
Mm-hmm.
When you were speaking of academic writing, I was thinking like two things in terms of community. So I found, as somebody who was enrolled in two different postgrads and dropped out of the first one, I dropped out of it because I was so lonely. Like, it was unbearable. I didn't feel like I had any kind of community or support. And I finished my second postgrad, which is the one that we did together in creative writing, also because of community. So I think like it's so important to be able to like be there for each other to get to that finish line. Like, we would have this class where we would write short stories and kind of speak about each other's work. And I found that to be one of the most like important things in like my whole life. It was so instrumental to me learning how to appreciate writing, even if it's a writing that like I wouldn't necessarily always read in terms of like genre or whatever, but the writing is good and it's interesting. So I think that like definitely with online platforms like Substack or whatever, there's a community, but it's very different to having a community with somebody who you're sitting with holding papers, taking notes, I don't know, I like tangible things. So yeah, I do think there's different forms of community. Each are helpful in different respects, but personally, I love a IRL meetup.
Could I ask a question in response to that? Not to usurp your
Definitely,
position,
definitely, please.
but do you think that those spaces made you write differently, or write things that, so obviously you said you were reading things that you wouldn't necessarily
Yeah.
seek out, but did you start writing differently, or wanting to write different things because of those spaces?
Definitely. So it wasn't because of our classmates, like our writing cohort was quite small, we were 9, I think. Actually, we were, I know that. So, yeah, everybody was very receptive to each other's works, I would say, in our class, and very clever and like kind in their responses. But I think the thing that made me want to change the content was our educator, just because I felt like there was some kind of disconnect, between what I was writing versus maybe what she was expecting, or so sometimes I would feel like I think what I'm writing is maybe too odd, like for this degree, and like, I mean, marks and stuff, I'm like about it, but it is nice to get a good mark,
It
so
does certainly
yeah,
feel good.
exactly. So it was like this weird thing where I was trying to find a balance between staying true to like what I want, like the story I wanted to tell, but also trying to like appease my lecturer in a way. And I hate that because I usually am not like that. Like trying to appease other people, but it was there. That is what influenced, I would say. And I just didn't want to like, I feel like sometimes I get stereotyped as something, and then I'm like, is this writing reinforcing that stereotype? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So like, that was very upsetting for me. What about you?
There was a moment where I thought, am I just going to write stories about robots for the rest of my foreseeable career?
Did you write any stories on robots?
I don't know if you saw any of the ones that I wrote about robots. I think all my characters come across as robots sometimes.
Do you think that says something about you and robots?
Let's unpack that.
Yeah. No, well, I was talking about the like computer science influence coming in weird ways. So there were a few stories that definitely were like obsessed with detail and time, for example.
Oh yes,
Yeah.
yes.
So like there is like a mechanical layer to it that is not in the construction, but is very much in the like actual subject matter of a lot of the stories that I write. Which I sometimes have to say, hold on, enough of this. I need to have a very like different experience sometimes. And I remember once I was prompted to write a story of a particular kind, and I sort of conceptualized a very specific horror, revenge, supernatural kind of thing. And I thought about it, and I just said, I don't feel like writing something this angry and this almost somber in some ways. I just want to write something that's light. And so I took the prompt was a ghost story.
That's my favorite story that you wrote.
Oh yes.
Yeah, and exactly what you were getting at.
Yes.
Maybe you should read it to us next time.
Maybe next time. So I sort of said just a ghost, and I was like, I want to write something about 2 friends, and one of them is a ghost. And I sort of just let that develop. And as I was writing it, I still found this sort of sadness in it.
I'm thinking like, this is the story without any somberness.
It started without it, but it sort of found it by the end, which I think was fitting. It was a natural progression of what I was feeling as I was writing it, and what I thought the characters were feeling as I was writing it. So even though I took inspiration from things like my childhood home that I would spend some time, a home during my childhood that I would spend some time at, and other elements from when I was growing up, I sort of tried to filter them through this particular, let's call it a conceit, or a premise for this story, which produced something that I was quite happy with. I thought it felt true to my spirit without necessarily falling into the trappings of my other stories. And I would not have done that without just practicing and doing random stories, and giving myself space to do that. We were talking about the restraints earlier, constraints earlier, and I don't want to disagree with any of what you said, because I think everything that was said here is definitely relatable. It's just that some days you feel like you're got different constraints, and some days you don't, I think. I mean, if we're talking physically, if you don't have a pen, you can't write on paper, or you don't have a pencil. So that's also a constraint. And I have run out of ink on a pen, and that has abruptly ended a writing session that I thought was going well.
That must have been painful.
Yeah, but it's something that I suppose you have to deal with. In that case, just picking up another pen. But there are often times where it's obviously a much graver situation, like maybe something in your life is preventing you from writing that you can't immediately overcome. And in that case, inspiration, imagination, none of those things are really any good when it comes to overcoming a metaphysical obstacle of that kind. Yeah, well, that was in response to something that you said, for sure. Yes, if the spaces affected my writing was sort of also the question. Yes, so even though those spaces of sharing and being inspired by other people facilitated that writing, it was also me having to look inward and be like, what do I feel like not doing today? And what can I draw from that I don't usually draw from? So I just try to put all the mechanical stuff aside. I like trying to put philosophy in my stories. I'm not very good at it. I try to, though, and I just said no philosophy today. No philosophy. Just two boys having a conversation is most of that story that we were talking about. And
now all I want is to read that story.
I'll send it to you afterwards. Sure, why not? But yeah. Okay, have we exhausted that topic? I think.
I mean, actually,
maybe not exhausted.
Maybe, but I wanted to bring in something after now by here.
Must I say what I was going to say?
Yes.
Oh, okay, thanks. Sorry, I keep kicking you.
That's all right.
But I think that also it depends on the class that we were in for our creative writing degree. Because if I think of I know you didn't do poetry, it was just myself and one other person in that class. But something that I learned in the poetry side of the degree was that you can kind of conceal things. So you can stay true to yourself because you know what you're doing. Because I feel like for myself, the person that I'm always writing for is me. If an audience identifies with it, cool. But if not, it's okay. You were not the core audience anyway, right? So I think that what poetry taught me is that there's a lot of stuff that you can conceal within your writing, or put little secrets in there, and you might be the only one ever who knows what it means. And I think that's really cool. I just wanted to say that.
A little bit like Shakespeare concealing his poetry within these stories.
Good old Shakespeare,
I mean,
the OG plagiarist.
So what I actually wanted to bring in was I think something that maybe ties a lot of the themes together that we have encountered at the Writing Center, which is the idea of mokapi, right? Because it gave me something last year, which was the idea of getting your freedoms being allowed somewhere else, in some spaces. Because sometimes, for example, you don't feel that you can write for just yourself, or sometimes you feel like your writing is not any good. Sometimes you feel like your writer's block, whatever it is, right? And the idea of mokapi, which is a companion in writing, or just a companion in general, it sort of broke something for me, which is you need to have and the idea of community now can do that for you. But sometimes you need someone who has a consistent and personal relationship.
Yeah.
At least as so far as you want to set those boundaries of that relationship, right? They can give you permission to write badly. That's what it is, right? And write badly and be okay. And because a lot of us write from a very deeply personal space, right? And sometimes when you write badly, it feels like a reflection on that personal space, like maybe something is not, or sometimes when those constraints that are so grave that you can't overcome, you need someone to say, it's okay. You don't have to be that good, or be good as you understand being good, right? So, how important from your writing journey, how important has mentorship, companionship, especially the kind of a one-on-one or mentor-mentee relationship? How important has that been in the growth of your writing? Try to go first.
Sure. I mean, the most important, exceptionally instrumental. Like, when I think about the concept of a mukape, it's so beautiful. Like, I don't know how to. It feels like you can't explain it. It's just something you feel, And I think I've had many in my life, but sometimes it's not even just like a single person, it's everybody in the space making it. So like when we had the writing retreat last year, right? That was like watching so many people, especially older people and women of color, speaking about so many different experiences. I just felt so inspired, even though it was the first time I met them. I felt like they've been there. It's like the idea of people like this existing and then meeting them, knowing that you're doing the right thing. Do you know what I mean? And even like my supervisor for my long personal research essay in creative writing, Stacey Hardy, that was like a lifeboat she was a lifeboat for me. I was such a piece of shit, honestly. Like, the way, like I was very difficult, I think, to supervise. But because of the state of the world, literally, it's impossible to be like, wow, let me write about the time I went to Coney Island when all these people are dying. Like, and like just having Stacey as somebody who was so good in terms of giving me resources, like aid my research, facilitate that, speaking with her as a human being, and just about, I don't know, like the clubs she used to go to when she was my age, which has nothing really to do with necessarily what I'm writing about, but like all of that was so useful and helpful. And even people who don't write, I feel like can be umukapi, because like if I think of my friends or my mother, like just kind of like the spaces that a safe space that like my parents will create for me, or even just listen to me go on about something that they don't really understand because it's to do with my research. I think feeling safe is very, very important because it makes you feel like you're not being judged or thought of as like weird for writing something. And it's really nice to feel understood. So yeah, that's for me, of course. But on that note, I also really like being alone. And I feel like, especially if I'm writing, I want to be alone. And I don't want anyone to see what I'm writing. So, it's a bit difficult when you're writing an academic research essay.
Yes,
like,
definitely.
don't, but yeah, I think there's like, I usually love doing lots of things alone, and writing is one of them, but I feel like there's space for my like insular individual stuff that I want to do, as well as something that I'm writing in an academic capacity, or even just to like, write short stories with other people, my friends or whatever.
I think all of that resonates with my experience as well. So I'm also going to just highlight where I feel, so building on that, I'm going to highlight some of the experiences I've had where it's like sort of not worked for me or where I disagree. But I think fundamentally we're talking about the same things. So, like mentorship and mokapi is also very important, I agree. I've had an unfortunate experience somewhat recently where someone I didn't know but who had a huge influence on my work turned out to be a bad guy.
Never meet your heroes.
Yes. So I feel very gross about being inspired by his work and even engaging with it. I don't feel the need to name him here, but a prominent fantasy author. So that's sort of where you kind of have to, it involves a lot of trust, really. And you need to trust your mokapis if they're going to facilitate your writing and they're going to be able to give you that space, even when you don't know them. But maybe that's why it's better when you do actually know them as far as we can really know each other. But
here comes the philosophy.
Yes, but and abruptly cut. But as for writing, I find it very difficult to write just for myself. As in, outside of what I was talking about earlier, practice, the idea of writing is fine for myself, but like writing a story, I need to have someone in mind that I'm writing that towards, or someone who I think could read that and enjoy it. Otherwise, for me, I struggle with direction, so to speak, because when it's in my head, I've already watched it, read it. I'm satisfied. I need to know if someone else would enjoy it. So it's almost like I have a range of mokapis that I sort of turn to depending on what I'm trying to write. Thinking, will this person enjoy this? Will this person enjoy that? And usually, the one person will not have the same exact taste as the other person. So, and that makes me become less worried about. I hope this is reaching a wider audience or something. Like, I hope this is good writing that anyone can pick up. And it's just like, no, I only need this person to be satisfied with it, really. And that doesn't mean I show it to them. It's just almost like a prompt for me to get it flowing and to give it some direction. Like if it's something that's got a bit of a comedic edge to it, then I'm usually thinking of, say, my dad. Yeah. We have a very similar sense of humor. So I'm thinking, how can I make my dad laugh?
Aww.
Here we go. Yeah.
I never think that.
Well, I'd be worried if you're trying to make my dad laugh. But that's sort of my experiences that are maybe also trying to put a full view of the topic, I suppose. But largely, I relate to most of what you said, so I just didn't want to reiterate it, even though that's what I would do. Is just reiterate how important the spaces are and how they can really give you the confidence. Feels like the wrong word, but the security that what you're writing is valid.
Yeah, and I think it would make sense that we have like some of the same views regarding that, because we've had similar experiences, doing the same degree, postgraduate degree, and both being part of like the writing center and the writing retreat. The writing center is such an amazing place as well for that.
Yes, 100%. I mean, we meet each other there.
Exactly.
I do see that there's a question about wanting to work for the writing center.
I just thought we could pick up those questions, as I think we have like 7 minutes, something like
Just about.
How time flies when you're speaking about open publishing.
Exactly.
Right.
When you're pioneering terminology.
In a sense, we are also open publishing our thoughts here.
Yeah.
So we have one question from Johara Khan, who says, what advice do you have for someone wanting to work for the Wits Writing Center?
Could I field that one maybe? So I don't know if you necessarily want to work for the writing center. I think it's more beneficial as a space that you just join and pass through and engage with the people, which there's no limitation on. I think, obviously if you're a Wits student, that's very easy, but I think even if you're outside of the institution, as long as you have someone who can account for you and you can walk in as a visitor, you can experience the space and you can interact with everyone. In a sense, I don't think the working contributes too much to, you can develop your abilities, but I don't know if that's something that you shouldn't. Obviously, working with the writing center is different to working for the writing center. Working with the writing center is very beneficial. You get to talk to so many incredible people and get some fantastic opinions, and there's probably going to be something great out of that. But yeah, what would you say to that, either of you two?
I think I like the parts where you highlight the difference between working for the writing center and working with the writing center, because for me, obviously we're at VETS, so it makes much more sense for us to talk about VETS writing center, but for me it speaks more to the idea of just a writing center and how critical it is for a lot of people, and especially because it is a designated space where you can have trusted mentors or trusted people who can come from different areas, but who genuinely have a whole range of expertise in a variety of writing fields and writing discipline. So it's just having a space where you can go free and gain different voices and perspectives and the such.
Yeah, and like for the people who are interested, it's on the first floor of Waltonweiler, ground floor. You enter and it's all the way to your left. So yeah, you can go there and speak to people, inquire if there's any open positions if you are interested in working there. It's also just such a nice space to work, and I feel like our writing groups that we had last year, we as writing fellows, we formed our own writing groups, which was so useful in me also finishing my degree, because again, it goes to accountability, and just like holding each other accountable. Yeah.
I'm very scared of the second.
Yeah,
What's the second
I've
question?
been quite excited to hear responses from the second question. So the second question is from Sneteva Mate. What advice do you have for someone with a creative writing degree looking for work within the creative writing industry or community?
Yeah, what advice do you have, Josh?
Yes.
I'm also looking for that.
Okay, I can try answering that first. My opinion is that writing is hollow if that's the only thing in your life. So you need to, it's like a jar that you need to fill with other things in your life. So I count myself very fortunate to have like a science background that I can always lean back on and draw from, not in an industry sense that, I could always get a job, more in the sense that I have something to draw from my writing, as well as like my just lived experiences of day-to-day life. Like I have an angle I can work if I'm ever lost for that, something that, gives my writing a specific voice. Because if you only work on the writing, I think it sort of is like working on a jar over and over and over again. But then you're not selling the jar necessarily, you're filling whatever you put in it. So I don't know if that metaphor works, but in terms of what you could maybe do for industry and community, I think, and I'm going to give my perspective here, which might not necessarily be practical, but trying to take opportunities that you find is great, but also trying to just make a platform for yourself if you can, until you find something that is maybe more stable and more sustaining in terms of your life, because you should value your own writing, but you're not always valued for your writing immediately. So creating a space for yourself first and foremost. I think most people who want to write or who want to be creatives, it doesn't always work out as a career, but I think you should still practice it, and then something might become of it if you're still going at it with the intention of creating rather than working and getting money from it. I guess the too long didn't read version of that is hustle, do something else, try to put your creative work out there, and hopefully some opportunities will come your way from that. Do you disagree? Or please disagree, because I hope that there's something useful that we can offer.
I mean, I think I'm very jaded, but pessimistic, cynical, if you will, about the state of the job industry. I mean, we have degrees, undergrad degrees, postgraduate degrees, and it's difficult, for people who have all of this educational background to get a job, period, but especially in creative writing. So I don't know. I mean, I guess I never thought of writing necessarily as a way to make money. It felt like a way of living in a sense. The reason that I chose to do my postgrad in creative writing is because I did think it would make me a better game designer, and it did. But also because I felt like I needed it, like I was stuck, and this helped to remove me from that space. So I don't know in terms of like finding a job as a creative writer. I just know about writing as a means of like being alive and living. And I'm sorry that this isn't necessarily useful, maybe. I don't know, LinkedIn creative writing, Indeed creative writing, Buzz community creative writing.
Yeah, I can understand why the two of you were afraid of that question, because I wouldn't know how to answer that question with
I don't know if anyone can.
with a philosophy degree. Probably one of the most pointless degrees.
The points.
Have you read digital art?
Yeah.
But I think our time is up.
Just about. I see Joe
Just about,
Harakan just asked,
can-
Wits alumnus but no longer registered. I think you can get a alumni card, and that gives you access to the libraries. Otherwise, you could just come in as a visitor and maybe try to do it that way.
I don't think you can work for the writing
Yeah,
center without being a registered student.
Yeah, but you can visit it.
Yes.
Yes.
But you can also definitely come in and ask. I mean, if you're a Wits alumnus, then you can definitely come in and just talk to the people. You really never know what comes of it. So when I started working there, I mean, it's not the same analogy or it's not the same comparison, but when I started working there, I just wanted to earn extra money.
Same.
Turns out
Honestly.
I took up the writing bug, and now I'm doing Time of the Writer. I never imagined myself. So I mean, sometimes some of these things you really need to just push yourself out there and see what the organic process will do for you, which I think applies to the previous question about having degrees that are not at face value quite easy to enter the job markets with. That sometimes, and it echoes what Josh was saying, you really just need to put yourself in different spaces and do the best that you can with whatever skills it is. Sometimes you come in with one skill and then you need to apply a different skill, or you need to learn a different skill, and maybe even your degree, might not even apply. So it's just really make an effort for the organic process to take part, and but then again, what do we know, or what do I know?
Also, you're doing your PhD.
I think we
Yeah,
Oh,
that's what we
unless-
have time for.
I think we set it up here,
Just a minute.
and we say our goodbyes.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us.
It's been an absolute pleasure having this discussion.
Yes.
Yeah, and thank you for moderating. Samantha.
I don't know that I moderated, but
You did.
thank you for having me. Thank you for having us as part of the Time of the Writer. Definitely appreciated the conversation, and we hope there can be a next time, and maybe,
Yeah.
Yay.
Okay, if that's all, I think we'll say our goodbyes now, and we'll see everyone next time.
Yes, thank you.